Hey, I'm Cadence. I'm in fourth year kinesiology. You're listening to 94.9 CHRW.
Welcome back to the Forum on CHRW. My name is David Seston, and before we launch into everything else, and before we launch into the idea that we had just before the end of the show, just before the break, sorry, I've got some stuff I need to do. You know, it's just the station stuff. So you're listening to us at 94.9 CHRW, and there's other ways to listen to us. If you have Rogers Digital Cable, you can listen to us on channel 943. If you have a smart device, and I think everybody has a smart device now, you can find us. There's an app called the Tuned In app, and just search for CHRW, and you'll find us there. And last but not least, there's the internet. So any sort of web browser, just type in the URL is chrwradio.ca, and just click on the Listen Now button. And you might not listen to the forum at that point, which you should. But there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff going on. The other thing I want to say is how you can get a hold of us here at the forum. So the first way is through the CHRW website, so chrwradio.ca, and there'll be a little button for the forum. You click there, and if you have comments, send an email, please. The other way is through Facebook right now. There's David on the Radio, which is my sort of Facebook persona, and everybody involved in the forum would love to hear your comments. So first we're going to get into what we were talking about earlier with sports. You know, you're like, I don't do yoga, so I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this, but I do know you play Quidditch.
Yeah.
So in this instance, and this is going to be an extreme situation, it's going to sound really, really silly until you break it down and think about it. What if a bunch of Brits came up and said, you know what, Clesta, you're Canadian, you can't play Quidditch. It's our thing. Exactly.
Okay, yeah, like...
There's
why?
Actually a Brit in the office, so it's kind of hilarious. But yeah.
I'd question that. Like,
but,
yeah, sure, it's their, like, it originated there and it's their sport, but, like, first of all, sports is one of those things where it's supposed to be something that kind of cultivates a community atmosphere and a safe thing. And the fact that you're trying to sort of just close it off for one group alone, I know that bothers me. Like,
yeah.
As you can tell, I love Quidditch. But like, I'd be upset if someone sort of just completely said I couldn't play that sport anymore because I'm not British, sort of, which sort of ties all the way back into when the students sort of retaliated because the one co-master of the dean said, shouldn't they be silly? Like, shouldn't they, I think how the student at least perceived it, shouldn't they be allowed to sort of wear those costumes because they're trying to, like, they got to be silly in order to sort of grow and stuff like that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that's just it. And at some point you've got to sit there and go, you know, hey guys, you made a mistake. Instead of, it all comes down to what's a learning experience and what's not. Certain things are obviously off limits and should be to a regular society, as obvious, and as we talked about earlier, blackface, things like that. Guys, not okay in any way, shape, or form. But if a white girl or an Arab girl were to wear a Native American costume, completely ignorant of the fact that, you know, hey guys, this is, you know, like, somebody might not like this, do you yell and scream at them, or do you say, hey guys, can I sit down and talk to you for a minute why this might not be okay? All right, guys, I'm gonna have to stop the conversation there, unfortunately. And now we're gonna talk about what's going on at Missouri University. And this is the bigger of the two, but it's also the harder to talk about because it's sort of, there are important things to talk about, but there's a bunch of people that have sort of done it wrong. So I guess we'll go into the history of it first. So Missouri University definitely has a history of sort of racism. They didn't allow a black student into the university until 1950. And even as late as last year, somebody tied a noose around the statue of the first black student at Missouri University. So there is racism going on. But here's sort of a timeline of what happened. Initially, somebody started some tweets. They said that somebody was driving around drunk in a nondescript pickup truck, shouting racial slurs at students of color, identifiable students. These tweets then started to progress into things like they were being abused, there was assaults going on, they were being corralled by the truck, things like that. And these tweets actually became very, very popular. Like they started trending really, really quickly because a lot of students sort of picked up the call and said like, hey, you could get in trouble if you go outside, just be safe. There was a lot of sort of concerned students. So for those guys, good on them for being concerned about their fellow students. Unfortunately, none of it actually happened. There was an incident off campus with somebody shouting something racial drunkenly out of a truck. This happened. But it didn't happen on campus, and nobody was getting assaulted, nobody was getting anything like that. So that sort of was the trigger point. From there, they discovered somebody had taken a poo and drawn a swastika in one of the dorm bathrooms. Now, there's nothing really funny about that. Drawing any sort of racial problems like that, it's horrible. Do not copy this in any way, shape, or form. However, they used poo. Like, it's gross in so many different ways. And that's really where things started to spark. So 2 groups came out of it. One was called the League of Black Collegiates, and it was followed by Black Student 1950, obviously in reference to the first black student at Missouri University. And they had a number of demands. They really wanted things like, well, first and foremost, for the president to step down for what they perceived as his failures. After that, there were a number of other demands. And you can actually go to My Demands, just Google My Demands or the Missouri University Demands. You can see a list of them. So they started doing a bunch of protests. They started doing a bunch of hunger strikes, things like that, things to get social change. However, how they went about it was maybe not the best way. The first bad incident really happened at homecoming for Missouri University, which is a big thing down in the States. I mean, it's a big thing here at Western as well, but particularly down in the States, it's a huge thing. They blocked the way for the president's car, and the president didn't exactly handle it the best way, but he tried to sort of put a light spin on it, tried to keep the mood light and happy. I'm not going to say who was right or wrong or what exactly happened. I think you need to look at the YouTube video and make your own judgment calls, but one of the students came in contact with the president's car. I'm not going to say how, but it happened. And there were and there were allegations of assault and, that sort of thing that came out of it. After that, they started holding a bunch of rallies. The first real rally was pretty big for them. I mean, Missouri University is not the biggest school in the world, but a large percentage of their student population showed up for this, but so did the media. Unfortunately, what happened is the white media was asked to leave, and they weren't asked in a nice way. As a matter of fact, one of their media professors, who was white and a media professor, asked them to leave and then started forcing them to leave and calling for muscle to physically remove them. If you know anything about the freedom of the press in the state, that's a big no-no. That's breaking the law, no. And for anybody to condone this is bad, but for a media professor, it shows where things were getting out of control then. After that, they held a second larger rally that unfortunately got rained out. So they moved into what would be the equivalent of the University Community Center, and here at Western, we'd call it the Mustang Lounge. Once they were in there, they asked the white students to leave. They quite literally segregated the protesting population by race, and the organizers of the event sort of split off into 6 different rooms with all the black students, and the white students were put downstairs and really didn't know what was going on. So, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, there were a lot of students who felt that something was going on, that it needed to be spoken about, that they needed to speak up about this, and they were joining their fellow students in protest. Then, without anybody knowing, they were told they weren't welcome anymore, and this has had some pretty serious repercussions. The biggest one is right after this event. Oh, sorry, before I get into that, later on, one of the organizers tweeted that they wanted to create a black-only healing space, which, if you feel you need, I guess it's important. It's not for me to say one way or another. My issue comes when this wasn't notified earlier, the space hadn't been set up earlier, and when you start segregating by a different color, this is where issues start cropping up. So that led to that. And unfortunately, because of the segregation, because of the white students not really knowing what was going on, why they didn't feel this way, things like white student unions started cropping up. So very much like a black student union or a Muslim student union, this was a white student union. And it initially started at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and it's still there. It is a legitimate supported student union. But because of that, some internet trolls got a hold of this whole idea of a white student union and the problems it can cause. And they started trolling, and they created Facebook pages for universities, particularly ones where racism is prevalent to this day, and they were basically causing problems. However, this isn't isolated to the United States. It has bled up here to Canada. Western University, just before Christmas, had a white student union crop up. It's still on Facebook. You can still search it out, and it's still active. The problem is right now, because of the way it's worded, because of their layout and things like that, they can't take it down. The university cannot order Facebook to take it down. They haven't done anything blatantly hateful, blatantly aggressive, though I will go on record as saying what is posted on that Facebook page is deplorable and thinly veiled racism. So that's where we are, and that's what we're going to start with. We're going to talk about Missouri University. I'm actually going to go in an interesting direction with this, and my first sort of question is, do you think the students were right in what they did?
Okay.
And there's a couple of incidences. I'm not gonna single them out, but with those incidents in your mind, both of you, do you guys think the students were right in their responses? As they sit there and formulate their question.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Because it's a hard question, because I'll go from my side and hopefully it'll lead you into this. The second you get an idea, jump in. The protests were necessary. There are racial problems in the United States. There's racial problems here in Canada. There's racial problems here at Western.
Mm-hmm. But I don't think in any way, shape, or form you can fix a problem by making another one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorta, I personally don't think the way that, sorta, I agree with the protests, because that was definitely necessary. I don't agree with physically removing the sorta media. Mm-hmm. That was a little overboard. And as well, on their second protest, when they got rained out and sort of went back inside, the fact that, first of all, they hadn't booked that room off for like a time for black healing sort of deal, if for lack of better words. I don't think it was appropriate to tell all the people who weren't black that they had to leave, especially if there were some, say, white people or Arab people who were actually in fact supporting them. Yep. Like, they had the same views as you. Can they not support you and help you with that time of healing?
They did the exact same
Like,
thing.
yes. of racially segregating that they were trying to protest against, which was sort of not okay. Like, personally, I think that's not okay. It kind of like, can they not, like, is it really a bother for them to have a time of healing with other ethnicities around? Like, it's sort of that deal. Like, if you're trying to stop society from singling you out and like culturally like trying to gain significance in society, are you really going to take the approach of, in order to be more noticed or to get more higher status, I'm gonna push everyone else out and sort of single my culture out and not try to cooperate sort of with other cultures in order to have my opinion heard? I think that was wrong, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I think the focus of the protesters, like, themselves, like, it should have been more of, like, why aren't we just brought, like, together, as opposed to, like, you know, oh, don't single us out, because, like, you know, everybody has to have that kind of sense of belonging, you know? Like, you should be safe in whatever environment it is that you're in. So the focus shouldn't have been of separating, like, oh, like look what, like, you know, like, we're being separated. No, it should have been more like, we should be brought together, not pointing out the fact that there's like just plain segregation and kicking the other students out that weren't black, because then like you said, that it just goes against the entire point. You know, we're trying to bring you, like, we're trying to show that we should be, like, included, like, we should feel, like, you know, the sense of belonging, we should feel safe, and then they proceeded to do the exact opposite with other students who, like I said, they could be supporters, they could have wanted to help, they, you know, the point is to bring them together, not to do more separation.
I think one of the things, personally, and I hope this feeling is echoed, I think it is that it shouldn't matter what color your skin is. It shouldn't matter where you come from. You're all in this university process together. And this is where you learn to adapt to other cultures, to bring different points of view into your life, and how to coexist with other cultures. I don't know really what to say about that, is because I'm really glad that it's just universally, some of the things they did were wrong. Do you think they did anything right? Because there's always two sides to a coin. And that silence is probably telling.
The thing is, like, I can't, like, I don't know exactly the point of view from sort of the protester side, just because media hasn't really displayed that. So I'm sure, like, obviously there were things that they did right, but personally, I think the story was so focused on sort of all of the events that they did towards, like, the media and that sort of side, that, like, I don't know if I can, like, me being, like, someone who just reads the news, I can't, like, formulate, like, okay, what's the other side of the story, sort of. Like, sure, I know about the protests and, like, I know what cause they're doing it for, but, like, at the same time, me hearing the fact that they only threw out media and, like, segregated people out of that building for that one protest, it kind of only gives me the view of, oh, the students sort of, like, are they really in the right to protest sort of deal? Do you kind of understand what I'm saying? Like,
definitely.
It kind of, I don't know, it's a fault with media sometimes. It prematurely formulates sort of a view in my head that I completely, like, am oblivious to all the good points that are going on and stuff like that. So, like, it's kind of hard sort of on that side.
Speaking of how media goes up, I'm actually like a media student myself, so we went through how like things are misrepresented and how they are. Like this is how I'm thinking of it, how there are some protests that the news specifically just centers out like one kind of issue. Like there was the issue with police brutality, and they were interviewing one of the protesters, and all the anchor was trying to do, all the news reporter was trying to do is just say like, didn't you want a peaceful kind of rally? Why are you like why is this why is this violent act happening? Why? And he's completely digressing from the real issue.
Yeah.
So the only thing I'd say is that they probably had a solid base to start their protest of, as in like trying to bring awareness to an issue. It's just how it branched off afterwards, just went completely downhill from there. Like regardless what the media kind of portrayed, it is wrong to try to force someone with physical force out of a media kicking them out for like that, like you said, that's just against the law and human kind of instincts, you know.
Well, particularly in the States, actually, the freedom of the press is absolute, and trying to remove them from anything is actually a big no-no. It's literally against the law. I think one of the things that sort of question that you both touched on is what you're doing by doing something horribly wrong. And for me, any sort of segregation, any sort of division based purely on you look different from me is horribly wrong. When you start mixing a wrong like that, any sort of good message you have just gets obliterated. And I think with some of the further subjects we're going to talk about is how do you worry about diluting the actual message with things that maybe really aren't that big of a deal, aren't so important, or you have something that is really, really important and then get distracted with, oh my God, you guys were doing the horribly wrong thing. You're kind of idiots on this one. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop it here. We're gonna keep talking. I'd like to thank Kwesi and Zane for joining with me.
No problem.
Thank you for being open enough to talk about this.
Well, thank you for addressing it.
Yeah, it needed to be addressed.
And honestly, for anybody out there listening, sorry to interrupt,
please.
but a lot of people, like you said, are afraid to talk about these things. And honestly, personally, if you know me, if you know of me, or if you see me in general wearing hijab, just don't be afraid to approach to ask me a specific question. You know, about if you're confused about some sort of portrayal, like some representation or whatever. If you come and ask me, I won't be offended. I'll actually be I'll feel happy that you came to ask.
There's my time.
Honestly, I think, just back to what she said, I think that stems out to a lot of people too. Like, if you really want to know about something, culturally, that you don't sort of know, honestly, the worst thing you could do is ask and they don't want to answer right away. Fine. But honestly, I think most students, at least that I've met at Western here, would be glad to sort of give you a update on what it is, why they're wearing that stuff, or what does it represent. That way you sort of get the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Sort of, and then
work on coexisting, understanding more.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I might use that as a soundbite a couple of times, but it's the whole thing about this is don't be afraid to have conversations. Don't be afraid to talk to the person beside you and say, hey guys, I have a question. It might seem dumb, but I legitimately don't know, because you can't know everything.
Exactly. And there's no shame in not knowing.
The only thing I ask is that you be respectful of your fellow students.
Yeah.
And if they say no, be respectful of them. And at the same time, if somebody portrayed in the media of a certain race, ethnicity, and it doesn't matter what race and ethnicity they are, or even one of your fellow students, if they're a jerk, don't hold it against anybody else that looks like them.
Yeah.
Not everybody represents everybody. If you have a bad experience with one person, don't let it sour you, and don't be afraid to talk. It's how you make friends. So I think with that, we'll end it. Thank you for listening to the forum, and we'll see you next week.